Hi, thanks for tuning in. I'm Dilip Sarkar, and I've been writing books about the Battle of Britain for 33 years, and I think the number probably is around 60 now. I'm currently working on an 8-volume official history of the Battle of Britain for the Battle of Britain Memorial Trust, and this is a very detailed investigation into the battle, the prelude to the battle, and day by day during the battle, 360, looking at the air fighting, fighter command, bomber command, coastal command, the navy, the politics, the diplomacy that's going on behind the scenes, and the day-by-day, minute-by-minute fighting. So it's a million-word project. It's a huge job. And obviously, when you do things like that, you're investigating in that much detail that you are going to discover things that you didn't know before. And I think one of those things, for me, is Hitler's strategy and how that developed during the Battle of Britain, how indeed the Battle of Britain arose, and when the Battle of Britain was fought. So we're going to look at that in this podcast in some detail and try and weld it all together. So that's what it's about. What was the Battle of Britain? When was the Battle of Britain? Were the official dates correct? When you look at Hitler's strategy, and what was Hitler's strategy towards Britain? So let's go and have a look at all that right now. One of the things that really fascinates me about the Battle of Britain, and something that I don't think is understood enough or even discussed enough, is Hitler's actual plans and strategy towards Britain and how the whole thing came about. Now, let's ask ourselves, what was the Battle of Britain? What we are told is that the Battle of Britain was fought to prevent the Germans achieving the aerial supremacy over southern England required as prerequisite to a seaborne invasion. Now, if that's the case, which it clearly is, any fighting either side of that endeavour is not the Battle of Britain. It's the wider air war. Now, I'm going to explain why that is, because there's so much misinformation out there and a popular narrative that doesn't stand scrutiny. So, when was the Battle of Britain? Well, according to the Air Ministry, it was the 10th of July 1940 to the 31st of October 1940. Now, when those dates were selected somewhat arbitrarily, in the words of Air Chief Marshal Dowding, we've got to remember that there was a great deal about the Germans' plans that was unknown at that time. Now, 80-odd years later, we know infinitely more. So it's highly unlikely that today, if the Battle of Britain's dates were selected, they would be the dates that were selected in 1945, when it was decided that there would be a clasp awarded to fighter command aircrew who participated in the battle. So this is all fascinating. Now, if you're dealing with an aggressive thing like this, that somebody is saying, we are going to invade you, well, then it is the aggressor who sets the date. And what would not have been known on the British side in 1945 is what was happening across the Channel in that respect. Yes, we had Enigma, but that was not getting into this level of high command orders. So let's have a look at this, shall we? Because a lot of people argue that it was the Dunkirk air fighting which signalled the start of the Battle of Britain. It did not. That was totally separate. The advance to the Channel coast by Germany was unprecedented and unanticipated. Nobody thought it was going to happen. Nobody imagined it was going to happen, that France, Belgium, the Netherlands would be rolled up in 6 weeks, and that Hitler would then be stood in Calais with Dover 22 miles away, with the advantage of airfields in the Pas-de-Calais that put even London within range of the Messerschmitt 109. Now, this changes the whole strategic picture unexpectedly. So the air fighting over Dunkirk had absolutely nothing whatsoever to do with an invasion of Britain, okay? It really didn't. Now, yes, it was desperate. Yes, it was a desperate time. Yes, it was the first time the Spitfire was committed to battle against German fighters over the French coast, but there was no German plan to invade Britain, so that cannot have been the start of the Battle of Britain. And neither could the night of June the 18th, 19th, 1940, when after the lull, following the Dunkirk evacuation, about 70 Heinkel 111s ranged over eastern England, and the Spitfire, Sailor Milan, 74 Squadron, achieves the Spitfire's first nocturnal kill. That's not the start of the Battle of Britain either. There is no plan to invade. Now, the first time there is any mention of invasion in German High Command communiques is on the 2nd of July 1940. And on that day, that is when the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, the OKW, the German High Command, informs the Wehrmacht, the German Armed Forces, that the intention is to invade Britain. Now, and on that day, fighting broke out over the Channel between the fighters of both sides. The first phase of the Battle of Britain are these attacks on shipping in the Channel and on coastal targets, and that started on that day. So that suddenly there is air operations, air fighting, and there is a plan to invade. That has to be the start date. Now, 10th of July was chosen because on that day, the fighting had escalated, involving over 100 aircraft over the Channel, and it was the heaviest fighting to date. But in fact, 2nd of July is that stated intention to invade Britain. Now, what's happening at this time is Hitler was always reluctant to fight Britain. Hitler admired Britain, he admired the British Empire, he had no desire to dismantle it, he had no interest in the Far East. And what he wanted was to expand eastwards and invade Russia. And the Soviet Union, obviously being the political bipolar opposite of Nazi Germany. So what happens is Hitler signs a non-aggression pact with Stalin, which then neutralizes Russia so that Hitler can concentrate on his attack on the West, attacking the Netherlands, France, Belgium, Luxembourg. Unexpectedly, this opportunity about Britain suddenly exists. It's, in modern history, a unique opportunity, and he has to do something about it. Now, Hitler's generals, so far, they had fought unprepared Western allies and rolled the whole thing up. People have argued Hitler should have come straight on after Dunkirk, and that had he done so, the army was still in disarray, had yet to regroup, he could have walked straight in. Well, no, couldn't have happened anyway, because the Channel ports, Calais, Dunkirk, Ostend, they'd been seriously damaged during the fighting, during the fall of France, and that needed repairing and making good. Then you've got to assemble this fleet of barges, which is a lash-up job. They have to be converted, they have to travel to the invasion ports, Calais, Boulogne, Ostend, Dunkirk, and assemble there, ready to transport the necessary German divisions across the Channel. There also has to be a plan. And you have three services: the Kriegsmarine, the German Navy, the Heer, the Army, and the Luftwaffe, the Air Force. And the service chiefs have no experience of such a combined operation. Now, if you were to consider the huge planning that went into Operation Overlord, the D-Day landings, the liberation of enemy-occupied Europe, it took years to plan that. So if anybody thinks that just because the British Army's been evacuated from France and the Germans are in control of the continent now, they could have just invaded just like that, they're deluded. It's not the case. This is a huge operation. And Hitler was fully aware of the hazards involved of a sea crossing such as this and such a generally hazardous operation, given the Royal Navy and, of course, the Royal Air Force, because it's not just about fighter command if there had been an invasion, because bomber command, coastal command would have attacked the invasion fleet and the landings and so on and so forth. So the defeat of the Royal Air Force is really absolutely and utterly key. Now, Hitler's generals, they knew that the Royal Air Force was not going to be a pushover, even though Luftwaffe intelligence is a demonstrable failure. And in fact, Plan Blue, where Jesenek, the intelligence chief, reported on fighter command, its organisation, its strength, and so on, got most of it completely wrong, just failed to understand the importance of radar, the system of air defence, how the whole thing was organised. So they were basing their strategy a great deal on misinformation, or certainly a great lack of information. But the generals were confident that an invasion of Russia, that was okay, because again, they would be dealing with an unprepared foe who could be surprised because now they've got this non-aggression pact. The attack would be unexpected, and the Russians were armed, generally speaking, with obsolete equipment. So that's really where the generals want to be going. But then there's this dilemma because of this unexpected opportunity to invade Britain. And Britain will not back down. And Hitler needs a swift victory against Britain so that he can turn eastwards. So what's happening here? Hitler knows this is a hazardous operation. He knows that a sea crossing and an air battle is going to be extremely costly in terms of German lives and resources. So if that can be avoided and Britain can be defeated in a different way, that's what Hitler wants. And what Hitler was very good at in the late 1930s was brinkmanship. Hitler would push Britain and France to the brink over certain issues, and the world held its breath, particularly at the time of Munich in September 1938 over the Sudetenland and Czechoslovakia. And war was avoided because Chamberlain, pursuing this policy of appeasement, Chamberlain being the British Prime Minister at the time, gave in to Hitler. And people were frightened of air power. After Guernica, there was a clear indication of how devastating air power could be. Then you've got the destruction of Rotterdam, Warsaw from the air by the Luftwaffe, and the Danes even surrender at the very threat of it. So Hitler is playing on these two things. He's playing on the success of his previous brinkmanship, and he's playing on the fear of air power. Now, these operations that are going on over the Channel and the coast, they are not going to achieve the circumstances necessary for invasion. Yes, they're going to draw fighter command into battle over the sea, which could prove costly, as it did in terms of pilots and aircraft. But it is not operations or bombing that will subdue Britain. But what it is what I would call air fleet diplomacy or air fleet brinkmanship. What Hitler is doing is, by increasing these operations over the Channel, he is playing on that fear of air attack and aerial bombing, and he's saying to the British, if you do not accept my terms, this will be turned on the British mainland and on the British people. And of course, the air strategy at the time, we're looking at Douai, who believed that it would be possible for an air force to win a war in isolation, independent of the army and the navy, through the bombing, amongst other things, of civilian population, which would cause panic and resentment against their own governments and even provoke an uprising, forcing the government to surrender. So there's a lot going on here that's dictating the operations that are taking place on the wider stage. But what Hitler's building up to is his preferred option is to defeat Britain through brinkmanship, through blockade, and through getting Churchill and his war cabinet to accept surrender terms. And that's what all of this is building up to. Hitler's speech on the 19th of July 1940, in which he makes what he calls the last appeal to reason, which is imploring Churchill and Britain to accept Germany's terms and to put an end to the bloodshed, to make Hitler appear reasonable. And he was particularly concerned that if he bombed the British in the way that even Admiral Raeder, the Kriegsmarine chief, wanted, it would turn American public opinion against Germany and possibly even bring America into the war on Britain's side, which was something that Churchill was clearly very keen to engineer and to get America into the war on Britain's side. So all of this is building up to this key moment, this key speech, the last appeal to reason, and then there's no response from Britain. Silence. A deadly silence. Churchill, in fact, said he had no intention of responding because he wasn't on speaking terms with Hitler. But the War Cabinet decided that there should be a response and that the response should be made by Lord Halifax, the Foreign Secretary. And this is really significant because Halifax was a big supporter of Chamberlain's appeasement policy before the war. So for Halifax to make this broadcast on the 22nd of July to say that Britain will fight on, that delivered a very strong message. Brinkmanship failed. So Hitler is now boxed into a corner because he's either got to back down, which he's not going to do, or he has to go with Goering's Luftwaffe taking on the Royal Air Force and bringing about the conditions necessary for Operation Sea Lion, the proposed invasion, to proceed. And he's got no choice. But there is no immediate action after the 22nd of July. He still deliberates. He still prevaricates. He delays. And this is wasting crucial time. The British weather is unpredictable. The English Channel is unpredictable. And the time is crucial. This is summer 1940. And it's slipping away. But by the 31st of July 1940, Hitler knows that he has to go. He has to at least try, because otherwise this unique opportunity will be completely lost. So on that day, Hitler meets with Generalfeldmarschall Albert Kesselring, the commander of Luftflotte II, that would bear the brunt of the battle against London and the southeast, and Generalfeldmarschall Sperler, who would be attacking Liverpool by night during the Battle of Britain and participating in daylight operations against Southampton and targets in the southwest. And he tells them that he has decided that if the conditions are met to invade Britain, that the Luftwaffe achieves aerial supremacy, then the invasion will go ahead. And indeed, people often quote Führer Directive number 16 that was issued on the 16th of July 1940, in which Hitler makes clear his intention to invade Britain to prevent it being a base from which war against Germany can be prosecuted, and to invade and occupy if necessary. Now, all of that said, that I believe is still part of Hitler's brinkmanship leading up to that speech on the 19th of July 1940. So by the 31st of July 1940, there is no question. Hitler has given orders to his air fleet commanders. On the same day, Reichsmarschall Goering meets with the OKL, the Oberkommando der Luftwaffe, and he tells them what is going to happen, that air operations are now specifically aligned to a plan to invade Britain, and that this has to mean the defeat of the Royal Air Force, which will be done in two ways. It will be, the idea is to defeat the Royal Air Force, to defeat Fighter Command, a line south of Gloucester to London in phase one, and then After that, extend the air offensive northwards so that all RAF bases are under attack. So that's it. It's happening, isn't it? So there are a number of dates there, but it has to be aligned to a German attack plan. Otherwise, it is not a battle being fought to prevent the Germans achieving aerial supremacy. So clearly, the first day on which invasion is mentioned is the 2nd of July 1940. That, to me, there is no question. That is the day that the Battle of Britain began. Now, Hitler, having decided that he is going to give Goering's Luftwaffe the chance to do what Goering believes will only take 4 or 5 days of unbroken good weather, gives Goering until the 15th of September 1940 to achieve this. And on that date, Hitler has to make a decision. Are we to go or not? And the whole Eagle offensive is delayed because of bad weather. There isn't the progress that Goering believes his Luftwaffe should be achieving. There's lots of arguments in the German camp. The fighter pilots are being blamed for heavy losses because of not escorting the bombers closely enough. And it's all pretty horrendous, actually, over there at that time. Goering is continually frustrated that the end result is not being achieved, and on the 15th of September, the Luftwaffe bomber crews were told that the fighter command was down to its last handful of Hurricanes and Spitfires, and yet on 2 occasions they are met by hundreds of Spitfires and Hurricanes over London, demolishing their morale. And it was on that day that Hitler really realised that there was no way was the Luftwaffe going to achieve aerial supremacy anytime soon. And although he didn't make his decision that day, he delayed it a further 2 days to the 17th of September, and that was the last day on which he could make a decision, given going forward the adverse changes to weather and tide. And on the 17th of September, he postponed Operation Sea Lion indefinitely. So you could argue, or he postponed it until the following spring, actually. So you could argue a case for the 2nd of July to the 17th of September 1940, and anything outside of those dates is the wider air war. However, Goering still believed, regardless of this failure, that the Luftwaffe could still bring about the defeat of Britain. So the bombing continues, particularly by night. Now, at night, Britain's defences were in their infancy, so the German bombers were much safer operating over Britain at night, but bombing was less accurate. So it's a double-edged sword. But the fighting's still going on by day, particularly with the fighters, and there's still some heavy daylight bombing raids to come. But these things are not going to bring about the fall of Britain. The German Air Force is simply not geared up for this. It's a tactical air force really designed to operate in concert with the army, not operate a strategic bombing campaign. But it's still going on, and Goering is still confident, even though he's frustrated. It's still going on. But on the 12th of October 1940, that is the day that Hitler gives up Sea Lion completely and postpones it indefinitely. Now, that is not to say that if suddenly the circumstances required for a seaborne invasion were achieved, surprising though that would be, Sea Lion would have been reborn, no doubt about it. But ostensibly, Hitler had turned away from that strategy. That is not to say he had turned away from a war with Britain. That will be far, far from the case, because Hitler's eastward gaze then towards Russia also included a revised strategy against Britain. And this is what I don't think people understand. Churchill needed 2 things. He needed America to come into the war on Britain's side, and preferably he needed this devil's alliance between Germany and Russia to collapse, and the Russians to also come into the war on Britain's side, which would then mean Hitler would be fighting on two fronts, east and west. Now, what Hitler decided to do was, by attacking and invading and defeating Russia in short order, that dealt with both of those matters, because a defeat of Russia would be greatly to Japan's benefit in the Far East. And that would then tie down American interests and American forces in the Far East, meaning that America would have no interest in the ongoing war in Europe and would pursue its policy of isolationism from events in Europe. So that effectively neutralized the United States strategically. Secondly, by invading and defeating Russia, that then removed any possibility of the Russians entering the war on Britain's side. And what both things would do was completely isolate Britain. And with Germany, the master of Europe, and Russia, America tied down in the Far East, Hitler could then turn to achieving the defeat of Britain, howsoever he chose. So the invasion of Russia, Operation Barbarossa, 22nd of June 1941, was crucially important to Hitler, to the war, but it was not in isolation. It also included a revised strategy to defeat Britain. So it's very interesting to consider these things, how everything comes about. And in this 1 million word, 8-volume official history of the Battle of Britain I'm writing for the Battle of Britain Memorial Trust and National Memorial to the Few, we have gone into this in great detail throughout the series as we chronologically dissect the Battle of Britain day by day and analyse the various changes to strategy and how the whole thing is developing. And it is really fascinating. But certainly, to me, Hitler's strategy is really, really interesting. And was he serious? Yes, he was. No question about it. For that period of time, between certainly 22nd of July after Halifax's speech and the 15th of September, yes, Hitler was serious about invading Britain. No question whatsoever. So anybody who thinks that the Battle of Britain wasn't important, wasn't cracked up to be, or wasn't actually what it's cracked up to be, they're wrong. There is a popular narrative that needs challenging in certain respects, but overall, the Battle of Britain was absolutely essential to keep Britain in the war and keep it as a base from which, in due course, hopefully with American help, the liberation of enemy-occupied Europe and the defeat of Nazism could be launched. And that's exactly what happened on the 6th of June, 1944. So there it is, a whistle-stop tour of some key dates and Hitler's strategy, and when the Battle of Britain took place, what was the Battle of Britain, and going forward, we're going to be looking at things in even more detail as we continue these podcasts and videos. So thanks for listening. I hope you found it interesting. Whatever your comments are, whatever your feedback, please let me have them in the comment section below, and we'll talk again next time. Thanks very much.